lead to mold. So do you want to make that next jump, which is to say you've got a stain on the ceiling. That may be an indicator of water intrusion. You may want to have a contractor take a look at that. You may want to have a roofing expert take a look at it, and you may want to be aware that there are issues that are related to water intrusion. That's the distinction between what you're looking at and what your buyer is looking at, even though you're looking at the same thing, is the red flag that is associated with that is supposed to go off in your mind, whereas it may not go off in the buyer's mind. Yes?
You go on a listing appointment and you see a major crack on the ceiling. You sign the house up and the seller has painted the entire house. Has taken care of that crack. What do you put in the AVID?
Well, I don't know that I would ignore something like that. And again, this might be one of those situations where you want to have a discussion with your seller first and say, I understand you've refreshed the house and it looks really nice, but I noticed a big crack in your ceiling that seems to have been painted over, and I think that we ought to disclose that to the buyer, because painting over a crack is not fixing the crack. I mean, it's concealing it. And I mean, maybe if it's a cosmetic crack that's not going to reoccur, maybe you fixed it, but maybe you haven't. And if you haven't, that's a pretty bad position to be in when a buyer finds out that there is some sort of a structural issue going on with the house. So I guess that was the long answer. The short answer would be, yeah, I disclose the crack, and I would say, crack appears to have been painted over. Buyer is encouraged to investigate this much more closely. Okay, way in the back, you've had your hand up before. No, actually in back of you, white shirt guy.
What Maury's talking about, doesn't the seller's property questionnaire answer that question?
Exactly, yes.
Well, it does if the seller is honest about it and puts it down, but if the seller is going to say, hey, it's not there anymore, I don't have to disclose it, then you got an issue.
Disclose if the house has been painted, and he knows it's been painted, so he would tell him to put it in there.
Right, but if you're painting over cracks, you probably want to disclose that to your buyer, and not, especially if you know about it as the agent. I mean, if you took the listing and there were cracks, and then you came back 2 weeks later and there's no cracks because it's been painted over, I think you got to disclose it.
I'm not talking about trying to hide it. I'm saying that's how you would disclose it, not necessarily on the AVID, but on the property questionnaire, wouldn't you? As the agent.
Well, the agent doesn't really fill out the seller's property questionnaire.
No, I know that, but he. No.
I don't know. I'd put it on the AVID. So, okay, right in front of white shirt guy, you had your hand up.
Hi, I'm Annette Roth.
Hi, Annette.
It's a house that's got all hardwood floors and very large area rugs that are, and I'm the buyer's agent. What do you say to your buyer about the fact that your inspector's not going to roll away the furniture, roll up the rugs? How would you handle that?
How would I handle the fact that it's got hardwood floors with area rugs?
With big area rugs that are not going to be moved during the inspection. You're not going to know what's under those area rugs until they move out.
Well, I think the inspector's reports are pretty good about detailing the fact that they're not going to move furniture, they're not going to look under carpet, under rugs, that kind of stuff. So I think you're pretty well protected on that. Where I would be looking, if I were looking at hardwood floors and things like that, is there any buckling? Is there anything that you would associate with, a problem with the foundation or water intrusion that's buckling these things? And if you see that, that's what I would note down. But I don't think that I would put on the AVID, has hardwood floors with carpet. We don't know what's underneath the carpet. Well, what's underneath the carpet is the hardwood floor. If you see an issue with the hardwood floor, then that's what goes on your AVID. There was a ton of other hands up, but you had yours up through the whole question, so I'm going to go with you.
Early on, you were talking about there were sort of almost two standards for which you would fill out the AVID.
No, there's not almost. It is two standards.
Okay, one is a buyer's agent, one is a seller's agent.
Right.
So you are the listing agent.
Mm-hmm.
You fill out your AVID when you're doing the listing.
Right.
You don't know whether or not you're going to have a dual agency transaction.
Right.
So subsequently, another agent in the company represents a buyer. Now you're dual agency. Is your AVID suddenly substandard, or are you relying on the other agent's AVID to bring both, efforts up to proper standard?
Well, I guess the the long answer to that, which is what I'm best at, is that you've got to take a look at what the other side of the transaction puts on their AVID, and if they have been diligent because they're the ones that are, that have the close relationship with the buyer, I don't think that you need to go back and redo your AVID so that it is a mirror image of the one that the other guy's done. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, I mean, literally, at the end of the day, we're all here to protect our own individual hides. So if I'm sitting here and I've filled it out, and then, and I'm, as the listing agent, taking it to the level that you recommended covers my ass. So hopefully,
right.
Then all of a sudden you go, oh Christ, somebody else in my office has just done it. I'm worried about protecting me and my efforts in what I'm doing here. I don't care what the other person's going to fill out. That's their responsibility. So do I just say I got to tear this up and do
No,
another
that's
one?
not right. No, you do care what they fill out, because if you have an inkling of a problem, you need to make sure that the other person addresses it.
But I'm supposed to write there's a crack in the ceiling.
If there's a lawsuit,
I'm not writing you should have a structural engineer, but up. Let's say you represent the buyer and you don't write that. Do I
understand. I've been sitting here. But you need to maybe look at the other guy's AVID to see that he has pointed that way, and if not, you need to tell that guy, you need to point.
That's what he just asked.
Yeah.
I know, and he just gave the answer.
No.
The answer.
The answer yet.
The answer.
He didn't give the answer yet.
All right.
Here's my point.
Do you want the mic?
As the risk manager for South Dakota, he fills it out. We have another person sells it. It would be wise for him to look at the other guy's document, which you have access to through Transaction Point, and see that he's done an adequate job. Because you'll be brought in if he has not done an adequate job. So if you know there's an issue, you need to make sure that the issue is touched on. That's what I'm saying.
But
You don't need to go back and write it up. You need to make sure, when I walk into a house, and I walk downstairs into the basement, and the basement is musty, I say to the listing agent, you need to point to the mustiness on your transfer disclosure statement. Well, this stuff is plain.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some communication between you and the agent that's got the relationship with the buyer. So if you go into it as just a listing agent and you make your disclosures and you've got all the protections of all the little cases that I talked about, and you're sitting happy with your disclosure statement, and all of a sudden this guy over here brings in the buyer, then yeah, unfortunately that is kind of an indicator to you that I got to watch this transaction a little closer now, because I literally have now become a dual agent. And I know it doesn't feel that way because you don't have the relationship with the buyer, you don't have the communication with the buyer, and so on and so forth, but the law is going to say you are a dual agent, you are a dual agent, South Bay is now a dual agent. So yeah, you kind of do have to say that crack in the ceiling, that all I said was crack in the ceiling, 2 weeks ago when I filled out the AVID, now I got to make sure that is addressed appropriately with the buyer. So, personally, the way I would deal with it is I would see what your counterpart on the other side puts in their AVID. And if they are making the appropriate disclosure saying, crack in the ceiling, have this looked at more in depth by a structural engineer or by a contractor, that's fine. And if you don't see that, then maybe you gotta call up the other agent and say, let's get together on this disclosure, because we've got some issues here that aren't being addressed maybe in the detail that we need to, now that we're both responsible as fiduciaries under this file. So does that make sense?
I guess so, but then it sort of drifts back into Jack's comment earlier, where all of a sudden you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're potentially damaging what your seller's concept is, the value of his property, by creating an issue. I understand what you're saying. You got to go to the other person and say, you need to put this, and this on your AVID.
Right.
You didn't